and we'll keep drifting, floating together through the mysteries. 100 rained straight for 2 million years mysteries, looping softly, endlessly, through the night. Tonight we'll drift through the moment. Earth's skies locked into an endless rhythm of rain. How 2 million years of rainfall reshaped continents, oceans, and life itself. What the planet remembers from a world that never dried. There's nothing you need to do now. Just let your body sink. Heavier, heavier. Feel the mattress holding you, every muscle softening, your heartbeat slowing, thump, thump, matching the rhythm of space itself. Shoulders melting down, jaw releasing, each breath pulling you deeper, deeper into the calm, the quiet, the dark. If this helps you rest, tap subscribe, comment, and hit like, so others can find this calm too, but only if your eyes are still open. Otherwise, just drift. Now, let's drift into rained straight for 2 million years. 234 million years ago, in the Middle Triassic period, something shifted in Earth's atmosphere. The sky, which had cleared and clouded in natural cycles since the planet first breathed, locked into a pattern it couldn't escape. Rain began to fall and fall and fall, not for weeks, not for years, but for 2 million years without pause. Picture it now, as your breathing slows. The day the skies stopped clearing, clouds gathered over ancient Pangaea, that single supercontinent holding all Earth's land in one massive embrace. The clouds thickened, darkened, and opened, releasing rain that would outlast mountain ranges, outlast entire evolutionary branches, outlast the memory of dryness itself. This was the Carnian pluvial episode, Earth's longest uninterrupted rainfall event, a climate anomaly so profound it rewrote the rules of geology, of biology, of what a planet could become when water refused to stop falling. Let your eyelids grow heavy, heavier, as we drift back to what caused this endless deluge. Deep beneath the surface of Pangaea, volcanic systems awakened across a region called the Rangelia Large Igneous Province. Magma pushed through the crust, not in explosive bursts, but in slow, sustained flows that lasted for epochs. These eruptions released carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, flooding the atmosphere with greenhouse gases in quantities Earth hadn't seen in hundreds of millions of years. The atmosphere warmed 1 degree, 2 degrees, 5 degrees. The warming accelerated evaporation from the vast Panthalassic Ocean, that ancient sea covering most of Earth's surface. Water vapor rose, condensed, fell, then rose again, creating a hydrological cycle pushed into overdrive. But the planet's systems couldn't balance, couldn't restore equilibrium. Evaporation could no longer keep up with the fossing rain. The cycle locked, trapped in a feedback loop where warmth bred moisture, moisture bred clouds, clouds bred rain, and rain bred more warmth. Feel yourself sinking deeper into the mattress, your body growing softer, looser, As we drift through this ancient climate lock-in event, Earth had entered a state it couldn't escape. The mechanisms that normally regulated rainfall, seasonal shifts, atmospheric circulation patterns, pressure systems that moved storms across continents, all of these jammed into a single repeating pattern. Rain, 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 without variation, without relief. The first year passed, then 10 years, then 100. The rain never stopped. Clouds became permanent residents of Earth's atmosphere, layered thick across the sky from horizon to horizon. Generation after generation of water droplets formed, fell, evaporated from warm ground, and rose to form again. The sky became a ceiling, not a window, separating Earth from the cosmos beyond. Imagine lying beneath those eternal clouds, your breath slowing, matching the rhythm of endless rainfall. Sunlight filtered through eternal storms, dimmed to a perpetual twilight. The bright noon sun became myth. Morning and evening lost distinction. Day after day arrived in shades of grey. Soft light diffused through water-heavy air, creating a world where shadows barely formed, where everything existed in gentle, unchanging dimness. The soundscape of Earth transformed completely. Before the rain, winds carried the scratch of sand, the rustle of dry vegetation, the crack of breaking stone. But now, only one sound remained, the hum of rainfall as planetary white noise, a constant patter that varied only in intensity, never in presence. Rain on rock, rain on water, rain on the broad leaves of plants that learned to live beneath the deluge. This was the dominant sound of Earth, the rhythm by which time itself seemed measured. Let that sound wash over you now. Thump, thump, your heartbeat, patter, patter. The rain that fell for 2 million years. Feel your muscles releasing, softening, as we drift deeper into this saturated world. The slow drowning of early landscapes began immediately. Pangaea's interior, once home to vast seasonal floodplains and semi-arid basins, filled with water that had nowhere to go. Rivers swelled along their banks, merging into each other, creating waterways without clear beginnings or ends. What had been a network of distinct drainage systems became a continental web of interconnected floods. Soil that had hardened under ancient suns, cracked and baked by heat, now softened, saturated, and began to flow. The ground lost its firmness. Clay particles separated. Minerals dissolved into solution. Earth's surface became a slurry of suspended sediments, constantly moving, constantly reshaping. Soil never hardened again, not for 2 million years. The planet's skin remained perpetually wet, perpetually malleable. Mountains, those ancient monuments to geological violence, began their long dissolution. How mountains eroded into memory. Rain fell on peaks that had stood for hundreds of millions of years. Water seeped into cracks, dissolved minerals, carried away fragments grain by grain. Chemical weathering accelerated under the constant moisture. Feldspars broke down into clays, Limestones dissolved into calcium-rich runoff. Even resistant granites weakened under the relentless chemical assault. Without dry periods to slow the process, erosion proceeded at rates the planet had never experienced. Rivers carved faster than tectonics could uplift new stone. Valleys deepened, widened, merged. The sharp edges of Earth's topography, knife-ridge mountains and steep escarpments, slowly rounded, smoothed, softened under the patient violence of endless water. Your breathing deepens, slows, as we drift through geological time, through the reshaping of coastlines by constant runoff. Every river on Pangaea swelled to many times its original size, carrying unprecedented loads of sediment toward the sea. Where rivers met ocean, massive deltas formed, grew, expanded outward into the shallow continental shelves. Sediments piled up without pause, layer upon layer of clay, silt, sand, building underwater platforms that would one day rise as the rain-sculpted geology of future continents. The ocean itself began to change. Oceans fed beyond their limits. Fresh water poured from every landmass, diluting the salt content of coastal waters. The changing salinity of ancient oceans created zones where marine life struggled to adapt. Surface waters, normally salty and dense, became lighter, fresher, floating atop the denser saline water below. Ocean stratification under constant freshwater input prevented the normal mixing that brought nutrients from deep water to the surface. Marine ecosystems shifted, reorganized, as species responded to diluted seas. Let your jaw unclench, your tongue rest, as we float through these ancient waters. Some marine creatures thrived in the brackish transition zones. Others adapted to stable salinity, faced extinction pressures from an ocean that no longer matched their biology. The fossil record shows turnover, replacement, the appearance of new species adapted to a wetter, stranger world on land. Life faced its own transformation. Forests adapted to permanent saturation. Plants that had evolved with seasonal dry periods, that dropped leaves to conserve water, that developed deep roots to find moisture, suddenly found themselves drowning. Their root systems, designed for occasional drought, rotted in oxygen-poor, waterlogged soil. Many species vanished, unable to breathe through roots submerged in standing water. But evolution never sleeps, even under endless rain. New plant species emerged, plants with shallow, spreading root systems that could access oxygen near the soil surface. Plants with specialized tissues that transported oxygen down to submerged roots. Ancestors of modern wetland vegetation, ferns and horsetails and cycads, spread across landscapes that had become planetary swamps. How plants evolved in non-stop transpiration, adapting to an atmosphere permanently saturated with moisture. Leaves developed waxy coatings thicker than before. Stomata, those tiny pores that release water vapor, modified their behavior to prevent oversaturation of plant tissues. Life learned to breathe underwater, to thrive in the deluge, to find opportunity where others found only drowning. Feel yourself drifting, floating on this river of information, your body completely relaxed, completely supported, as we explore the collapse of fire on Earth. Fire, which had shaped ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years, vanished. Lightning still mattered, still cracked through the eternal storms, electrical discharges seeking ground through rain-heavy air. But the lightning that once ignited dry vegetation, that cleared old growth and recycled nutrients through flame, now struck only wet fuel that refused to burn. For 2 million years, fire disappeared as an ecological force. The planet lost the cleansing burn, the ash that enriched soil, the open spaces fire created in dense vegetation. Forests grew thick, unburned, accumulating layer upon layer of dead plant matter that composted slowly in the wet. Life without seasons of dryness meant life without fire's renewal. Ecosystems evolved in fire's absence, developing new relationships, new cycles that didn't depend on a flame. The smell of earth changed completely. The smell of earth under constant rain, that rich, mineral petrichor scent released when rain first touches dry ground, became permanent, but also strangely muted. Petrichor comes from oils released by plants during dry periods, from minerals oxidized in air, from bacteria that flourish in soil moisture cycling between wet and dry. But under endless rain, these scents diluted, washed away, replaced by the smell of minerals forever exposed to water, the green scent of constant plant growth, the subtle rot of organic matter decomposing in oxygen-poor wetlands. Your senses drifting now, smell, sound, sight, all blending into the experience of a world transformed by water. The rain that fell on Pangaea sculpted continents, constant runoff reshaping deltas, building them outward into the sea, grain by grain. The sediment load carried by rivers increased 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Particles that would have settled in lakes and floodplains during dry seasons instead flushed directly to the ocean, creating sedimentary deposits so thick, so distinctive, that geologists can identify them in rock layers worldwide today. Continental smoothing over millennia. The sharp topographic relief that makes young mountain ranges dramatic and beautiful wore down, the planet's surface slowly dissolving under chemical weathering that proceeded without rest. Acidic rainwater, carrying dissolved carbon dioxide, reacted with exposed rock, breaking chemical bonds, releasing ions into solution, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, all washed from stone into rivers, into oceans, altering the chemistry of both land and sea. Clay-rich worlds emerged everywhere. As feldspars and other minerals weathered into clay, the proportion of clay and soil increased dramatically. Thick, sticky, impermeable clay layers formed across vast regions. These clays held water at the surface, preventing drainage, creating landscapes of standing pools, marshes, swamps that stretched horizon to horizon. The muting of Earth's colours followed. Reds and browns and oranges of oxidized iron, Colours that require dry air to form faded, replaced by the greys and dark browns of reduced, waterlogged sediments. Let your mind drift through these ancient swamps, your thoughts growing quieter, more distant, as we explore how animals adapted to soaked evolution. Creatures that lived through the Carnian pluvial episode faced a fundamental challenge. The world they were born into was wetter than the world their ancestors knew, and it would remain that way for their entire existence. For thousands of generations, waterproofing in early life forms became essential. Amphibians, which had dominated land for millions of years, suddenly found their permeable skin an advantage. They thrived in the endless moisture, spreading into habitats that had been too dry before the rain began. But reptiles, the rising class of terrestrial vertebrates, faced danger from constant wetness. Their scales, designed to retain body moisture in dry air, needed enhancement. Evolution favored reptiles with thicker, more overlapping scales, with behaviors that sought any available shelter from the endless rain. Migration on a flooded planet meant following water everywhere, because water was everywhere. But it also meant escaping water, seeking the few remaining high points, the temporary ridges and hills not yet submerged. Animals crowded into shrinking dry zones, competed for space on ground that stayed above the floods. The fossil record shows concentrations of bones in these refugia, places where creatures gathered, lived, died, all seeking escape from the planetary drowning happening around them. Your breathing so slow now, so steady, thump, thump, like the heartbeat of Earth itself under endless rain. Some animals abandoned land entirely. Ancestors of marine reptiles, creatures that would later become ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, made their first tentative returns to the ocean during this period. The sea offered stability. The ocean's chemistry changed slowly, but its wetness never varied. For some lineages, permanent water was easier to adapt to than the flooded, uncertain landscape of rain-soaked Pangaea. The silence of dust-free air created a world with peculiar acoustic properties. Sound travels differently through humid air. Moist molecules absorb certain frequencies, scatter others. The calls of animals, the crack of breaking branches, even the rumble of distant thunder, all sounded subtly different in atmosphere thick with water vapor. Earth's voice changed, became softer, more muffled, as if the planet itself whispered under the weight of clouds. Rivers carved their new channels with astonishing speed. The increased water volume, the accelerated erosion, the constant sediment load, all combined to reshape drainage networks faster than tectonics could respond. Ancient rivers disappeared. New ones formed. Canyons that would normally take tens of millions of years to carve, cut through stone in mere hundreds of thousands. Water, patient but relentless, proved itself the dominant geological force, more powerful than volcanic heat, more transformative than tectonic collision. Caves formed without dry cycles, and they formed differently. Most cave formation requires water to seep through rock, dissolving minerals, then receding to allow air into the cavity. But during the Carnian pluvial episode, caves formed and remained flooded. Limestone dissolved into solution, creating voids that filled immediately with groundwater. These submerged caverns grew extensive, complex, becoming underwater labyrinths that some aquatic creatures colonized, adapting to lives in permanent darkness, permanent submersion. Feel yourself sinking deeper, your body heavy, so heavy, supported completely by the surface beneath you as we drift through the darkening of skies over epochs. Cloud cover didn't just persist, it thickened. Multiple layers of clouds stacked upon each other. Low clouds, mid-level clouds, high cirrus clouds, all present simultaneously, creating an atmospheric barrier kilometers thick. The loss of clear horizons meant that sunrise and sunset, those daily markers of time, blurred into barely perceptible changes in grey light. Rainfall and the carbon cycle shifted in ways that would echo for hundreds of millions of years. The accelerated weathering of rock consumed atmospheric carbon dioxide. Calcium and magnesium ions, released from dissolving minerals, combined with carbon dioxide dissolved in rainwater, eventually precipitating as carbonates in the ocean. This process, operating at unprecedented rates, drew down atmospheric CO2 slowly, gradually cooling the planet even as volcanic emissions continued. But the cooling took time, geological time. For the first million years, volcanic emissions outpaced carbon drawdown. The planet stayed warm, stayed wet, stayed locked in its cycle of endless rain. Only in the second million years did the balance shift. Did weathering begin to overcome emissions? Did the feedback loops that sustained the rain finally weaken? Nutrients endlessly washed into seas, phosphorus, nitrogen, iron, all the elements life requires, eroded from land and flushed to the ocean in quantities that transformed marine ecosystems. Coastal waters became hypernutrified. Algal blooms spread, consumed oxygen, created dead zones where nothing could breathe. The ocean's edge, that productive boundary between land and sea, became a zone of excess, of too much life consuming too much, leaving too little for anything to survive. Your thoughts drifting like sediment in water, settling, spreading. As we explore when storms stopped being events. Before the rain, storms were episodes. They arrived, intensified, then passed, leaving clear skies between them. But during the Carnian pluvial episode, the distinction between storm and calm weather vanished. Every day was stormy, or more accurately, every day existed in a state of permanent precipitation that made the concept of storm meaningless. The role of monsoons turned permanent. What had been seasonal patterns of heavy rain, driven by temperature differences between land and ocean, became continuous. The mechanisms that created monsoons, warm, moist air rising over heated continents, never shut off, never cycled back to dry conditions. Monsoon rains, which even today can drop meters of water in a season, fell year-round, decade after decade, century after century. How humans would fail to survive it. If humans had existed then, our species would not have lasted a generation. We require dry shelter, dry fuel for fire, dry ground to grow crops, dry air to cure and preserve food. Every technology, every survival strategy humans have ever developed assumes access to dryness, to places where water can be escaped, controlled, managed. A world without dryness is a world without humanity, without civilization, without most of what makes us human. The psychological weight of endless rain, even imagining it now, as you drift towards sleep, creates a sense of claustrophobia, of nature pressing in without relief, sunlight which regulates our circadian rhythms, our moods, our sense of time, reduced to dim grey glow, day after day of clouds, of rain, of wet. Modern humans experience seasonal affective disorder after weeks of cloudy weather. Picture 2 million years. Picture never seeing stars, never seeing blue sky, never feeling dry air on your skin, but you're safe here, warm, dry, drifting into sleep as we explore the fossil records written in water, the sediments deposited during the Carnian pluvial episode tell stories, thick sequences of mudstone, siltstone, fine-grained rocks formed from particles that settled in still water. These layers appear worldwide, in Europe, in North America, in Asia, all dating to the same 2 million year window, all telling the same story of a planet drowning. Within these rocks, paleontologists find fossils, but the fossils themselves change during the rain. Bones preserved in the earliest layers show different mineral replacement than those from later. The chemistry of fossilization, which depends on groundwater chemistry, shifted as the rain altered soil, altered rock, altered the very processes that turn organism into stone. Some fossils from this period preserve in exquisite detail, mineralized rapidly in oxygen-poor, waterlogged sediments. Others dissolved away entirely, lost to acids in the eternal rain. The smoothing of Earth's sharp edges proceeded unevenly. Some rock types resisted. Quartzite, which contains mostly silicon dioxide, weathered slowly even under constant rain. These resistant formations stood as islands, as high points in a drowning world, providing refuges for creatures and plants that needed, that desperately sought, anything resembling solid, dry ground, but softer rocks, shales and mudstones and limestones dissolved rapidly. Entire mountain ranges, composed of less resistant lithologies, wore down to rolling hills, then to gentle rises barely distinguishable from plains, the slow burial of civilizations that never arose. Because civilization requires more than life. It requires stability, requires landscapes that don't reshape themselves within a creature's lifetime. The Earth of the Carnian pluvial episode was too dynamic, too fluid, too unstable for complex societies to emerge. Rain-fed landslides shaping continents. On the inclined terrain that remained, Waterlogged soil lost cohesion, inclines failed, slumped, sent massive volumes of mud and rock sliding downhill. These landslides, repeated across millions of square kilometers over millions of years, redistributed material from highlands to lowlands, from mountains to basins, carving new valleys, filling old ones, rewriting topography on continental scales. Your mind quiet now, so quiet, as we drift through the end of dry wind erosion, wind which sculpts deserts and polishes stone in dry climates, lost its erosive power, air too wet to carry dust, too humid to evaporate moisture from surfaces, simply moved across landscapes without picking up particles, without sand-blasting rock, without creating the ventifacts and yardangs that mark arid regions. For 2 million years, wind became gentle, became merely the movement of wet air that pushed rain but carried nothing solid. Atmospheric circulation trapped in loops, the same patterns repeated, high pressure, low pressure, convergent zones and divergent zones, all locked into positions they held month after month, year after year. The jet streams, those high-altitude rivers of air that normally meander and shift, straightened, stabilized, flowed along paths determined by the supercontinent's shape and the ocean's temperature. Weather, which normally varies and surprises, became predictable in its monotony. Rain today, rain tomorrow, rain forever. The planet's temperature under cloud cover stayed remarkably stable. Clouds reflected incoming sunlight, preventing extreme heating during the day, but they also trapped infrared radiation, preventing cooling at night. The result was a world of constant, moderate warmth. Temperatures varied little between day and night, between seasons that no longer existed as meaningful concepts. Earth's thermometer, stuck in a narrow range, neither hot nor cold, just endlessly, persistently warm and wet. Greenhouse effect amplified by humidity. Water vapor is itself a greenhouse gas, more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. As the rain filled the atmosphere with moisture, that moisture trapped more heat, which caused more evaporation, which added more moisture. A feedback loop within the larger feedback loop, a cycle reinforcing itself, making escape from the rain more difficult with each passing millennium. The sky as a ceiling, not a window, separated Earth from the universe beyond. Astronomers, had they existed, could not have developed their science. Stars, planets, galaxies, all invisible behind the eternal cloud deck. The cosmos, which influences Earth through solar radiation, through tidal forces from the moon, through cosmic rays that seed cloud formation, became distant, irrelevant, hidden behind water vapor that refused to clear. Your eyelids so heavy, your breathing barely a whisper, as we drift through rain-driven extinction pressures. Not all species could adapt. The fossil record shows disappearances, lineages that thrived before the rain, then vanished during it, never to return. large terrestrial herbivores, which required vast territories of dry land to graze, dwindled. Their ecological niches, opened by extinction, remained empty until the rain ended and new species evolved to fill them. But species that thrived in saturation, amphibians, early crocodilians, wetland plants, ferns that reproduced through water-dispersed spores, all these flourished, expanded, diversified. The Carnian pluvial episode was catastrophe for some, paradise for others. Evolution doesn't judge, doesn't prefer dry to wet or wet to dry. It simply responds, reshaping life to fit the world that exists. The loss of seasonal memory occurred gradually, then completely. Animals that had timed reproduction to rainy seasons, that migrated with wet and dry periods, that hibernated through droughts, all lost the environmental cues their behaviors depended on. Some adapted, developing new timing mechanisms based on subtle temperature shifts or food availability. Others locked into seasonal cycles that no longer existed, failed to reproduce successfully, faded away. Plants, too, forgot the seasons. Deciduous behavior, dropping leaves in response to dry periods, became pointless. Energy spent on leaf replacement, wasted. Evolution favored evergreen growth, constant photosynthesis in the constant dim light, constant growth in the constant moisture. The rhythms that had governed plant life for hundreds of millions of years dissolved like minerals in the rain. And as you sink deeper into sleep, deeper into this ancient world, we drift toward the mechanisms that sustain this impossibility. Ecosystems without drought stress reorganized entirely. Drought-resistant adaptations, deep taproots, water-storing tissues, waxy cuticles, all became unnecessary, even burdensome. Evolution, always economical, stripped away these expensive features, replacing them with adaptations for the new reality, for permanent wetness, for competition in saturated soil, rather than cooperation to find scarce water. Feel your body melting into the surface beneath you, every muscle releasing, every thought quieting, as we float through geological time measured in falling drops. Each raindrop, a tiny erosive force, multiplied by trillions, by quadrillions, by numbers beyond comprehension. All those drops, falling for 2 million years, carving, dissolving, transporting, transforming, reshaping a planet, one infinitesimal impact at a time. And the rain fell on, through the first 100,000 years, through the first million, into the second million. Earth locked in the grip of its own atmospheric chemistry, its own feedback loops, its own inability to break free. The planet that had weathered asteroid impacts, that had frozen into global ice ages, that had burned under extreme volcanism, now drowned, slowly, patiently, under the weight of its own hydrological cycle pushed past the breaking point. The rain fell on ancient forests that had never known a dry day, fell on mountains dissolving grain by grain, fell on oceans rising imperceptibly, fell on creatures evolving adaptations their descendants would inherit for hundreds of millions of years, fell on a world being remade, reformed, reshaped by the simplest of geological agents, water falling from sky to ground, rising, falling again and again and again. Your consciousness fading now, thoughts dissolving like limestone in acidic rain, drifting through a world where time moved slowly, where change accumulated gradually, where 2 million years of rain transformed everything, the continents, the oceans, life itself. And still the rain fell and fell and fell. Your body completely at rest now, breathing slow and deep as we drift deeper into this saturated epoch, deeper into the mechanisms that made escape impossible. The drowning of volcanic signatures began as ash and lava, evidence of Earth's internal fires, met the endless rain. Volcanic eruptions still occurred. Magma still forced its way to the surface, but the signatures they left, the ash layers that normally preserve volcanic events in geological records, washed away almost immediately. Ash that would have settled in distinct layers, marking individual eruptions, instead mixed with rainwater, became slurries of volcanic mud that flowed downhill, merged with river sediments, lost their identity. The volcanic record of the Carnian pluvial episode, fragmentary, washed out, tells us less about Earth's internal activity than any other period. The rain, in erasing volcanic evidence, erased part of Earth's memory, left blanks in the geological story that we'll never fully read. Feel yourself floating, drifting on currents of information as we explore how the planet's carbon cycle completed its slow shift. The volcanic emissions that started the rain, carbon dioxide and methane from the Vangelia eruptions, gradually declined as the eruption phases ended, but by then the planet had reorganized around wetness, the thick cloud cover, the altered atmospheric circulation, the transformed plant life. All these sustained precipitation even as the original trigger faded. For hundreds of thousands of years, Earth existed in a delicate balance, high falling, reveling and consuming CO2, but clouds and moisture keeping temperatures warm enough to sustain high evaporation. A razor's edge between continuation and collapse. The planet teetering, held in place by the accumulated momentum of 2 million years of atmospheric reorganization. The rain is the dominant geological force, exceeded all others in its ability to reshape Earth's surface. Plate tectonics, which builds mountains and opens oceans, operates over tens of millions of years. Volcanism, powerful but localized, affects regions but not entire continents. But rain, falling everywhere, constantly, for 2 million years, touched every exposed surface, carved every landscape, transported sediments from every highland. This was geological power of a different kind, not violent and sudden, but patient, persistent, and ultimately irresistible. Your heart beats slow, steady, thump, thump, like drops falling into an ancient sea, as we drift through atmospheric circulation patterns that wouldn't break. The jet stream, locked in position by the thermal structure of the atmosphere, directed storms along the same paths decade after decade. Weather systems, born over the warm Panthalastic Ocean, travelled inland along predetermined routes, dropped their moisture, then dissipated, only to be replaced by identical systems following identical paths. This predictability, this monotony of weather, meant that some regions received even more rain than others. The windward sides of mountain ranges, where moist air was forced upward and cooled, experienced rainfall measured in meters per year. Valleys in these regions, filled with water, became long narrow lakes that persisted for millennia, while the leeward sides, though still wet by any modern standard, received marginally less, creating subtle gradients of wetness across a uniformly soaked world. Let your thoughts drift away, like silt suspended in floodwater, as we explore nights felt under endless clouds. Darkness came differently during this Hanian pluvial episode, without stars, without the moon visible through cloud cover. Night meant the absence of even the dim grey light that passed for day. Total darkness, complete and enveloping, broken only by occasional lightning that illuminated clouds from within, casting brief, eerie light across saturated landscapes. The absence of stars for millions of years meant the loss of navigation, of pattern recognition, of the human connection to cosmos that wouldn't exist for another 200 million years. But for the creatures that lived through this time, the loss was absolute. Behaviors that had evolved using celestial navigation, migration patterns timed to star positions, mating displays synchronized with moon phases, all these collapsed, became impossible, forcing evolution to find new timing mechanisms, new compasses, new ways of orienting in a world disconnected from the sky. Earth without stargazing, whoa. Was Earth more isolated, more alone, wrapped in its own atmosphere, unable to see beyond itself? The planet turned through space, orbited the sun, but from the surface, that motion became undetectable. The universe beyond, the solar system, the galaxy, all theoretical, all invisible, all irrelevant to the immediate reality of rain, rain, rain. Your breathing barely perceptible now, your body sinking, as we drift through the slow memory loss of landscapes, topography. The shape of Earth's surface carries memory. Mountain ranges remember tectonic collisions. Valleys remember glacial carving. Deserts remember ancient climates. But during the Carnian pluvial episode, this memory erased itself. Erosion removed the records of previous geological events, smoothed away the evidence of Earth's deep past. Continental platforms that had been sculptured over hundreds of millions of years, planed flat in mere millions. The geological equivalent of amnesia, Earth forgetting what it had been, reshaping itself so thoroughly that the pre-rain topography became unrecoverable. When the rain ended, the planet emerged transformed, unrecognizable, a different Earth than the one that had existed before the clouds locked into place. Geological time measured in rainfall, each layer of sediment representing countless storms, countless drops, the rhythm of deposition, fine particles settling in still water, coarser materials deposited during floods, created layering visible in rocks today, rhythmites, alternating bands of dark and light sediment, sometimes show cycles, suggesting that even in the endless rain, subtle variations occurred, perhaps seasonal shifts in storm intensity, perhaps multi-year climate cycles, patterns within the larger pattern, rhythms within the endless drumbeat of precipitation. Feel yourself melting, dissolving, like minerals in acidic rainwater, as we drift through how caves formed in the eternal wetness, karst topography, landscapes dominated by caves and sinkholes and underground rivers, developed extensively during this period. Limestone, that sedimentary rock formed from ancient sea creatures, dissolved readily in the slightly acidic rainwater. Carbonic acid, formed when CO2 dissolved in water, reacted with calcium carbonate, carrying it away in solution. But unlike modern caves, which form and then drain, these caverns remained flooded. Groundwater tables, the level below which all pore spaces are saturated, rose to the surface across vast regions. Every void, every cavity, every space in the rock filled with water. Some aquatic creatures, fish and amphibians, colonized these flooded cave systems, adapting to permanent darkness, evolving pale bodies, reduced eyes, enhanced lateral line systems that sensed vibrations in still water. These subterranean ecosystems, invisible from the surface, thrived in conditions that would persist for millions of years. Life in the caves, shielded from surface floods and storms, found stability that surface life lacked. The fossil record rarely preserves these underground inhabitants, their bones, dissolved by the same acidic water that carved their homes, but trace fossils, burrows and feeding traces hint at complex ecological networks existing beneath the saturated soil. Your mind quiet now, so quiet, as we drift through the changing chemistry of minerals forever exposed to water. Iron, abundant in Earth's crust, oxidizes readily when exposed to air and moisture. The red beds, iron-rich sedimentary rocks colored by ferric oxide that formed in dry climates, stopped forming during the rain. Instead, iron-bearing minerals remained in their reduced, unoxidized forms, creating grey and green sediments, the colors of wetland soils, of anaerobic environments where oxygen can't penetrate. This change in iron chemistry, visible in rock sequences worldwide, provides one of the clearest markers of the Carnian pluvial episode. Below the grey layers, red beds, indicating dry conditions. Above them, eventually, red beds again, indicating the return of dryness, but in between, a thick sequence of grey, marking 2 million years when Earth's surface remained too wet, too oxygen poor, for iron to rust. 2 million years recorded in the absence of red, rainfall as planetary respiration, the breath of Earth becoming rapid, shallow, like someone drowning, the water cycle, which should function as a self-regulating system, became unstable. Each component, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff, operated at maximum capacity, pushed beyond normal limits. The planet breathed too fast, too deep, hyperventilating in a way that couldn't be sustained, yet somehow persisted for 2 million years. Let your body sink heavier, heavier into complete relaxation as we explore when clouds became climate governors. Clouds, normally just one component of weather, assumed absolute control. They reflected solar radiation, preventing extreme heating. They trapped infrared, preventing cooling. They released rain, preventing dry conditions. They created a thermal blanket, a moisture reservoir, a precipitation generator, all weather, all climate, all surface conditions mediated through clouds that never dispersed, never thinned, never allowed direct sunlight to touch ground. The feedback loops that wouldn't break persisted because each component reinforced the others. Warmth, created by volcanic greenhouse gases and trapped by clouds, increased evaporation. More water vapor, itself a greenhouse gas, increased warmth, more evaporation, more clouds, more rain, more weathering, more nutrients washed to sea, more algal blooms, more oxygen depletion, more carbon cycling through systems faster than they could equilibrate. Breaking such a loop requires external forcing, a change from outside the system. But Earth in the Triassic, isolated in space, orbiting its star in stable patterns, received no such intervention. The only escape, the only way out, came from within, from the slow accumulation of changes that would eventually, finally, allow the system to collapse back to something resembling normalcy. Your consciousness drifting like fog, like mist, like water vapor rising to form clouds that would fall again as rain. As we explore why the rain never stopped for so long, the answer lies in the interaction of multiple factors. No single cause sustained 2 million years of precipitation, but the combination, volcanic emissions providing initial warming, supercontinent geography, channeling atmospheric circulation into stable patterns, ocean temperatures remaining elevated by greenhouse gases, positive feedbacks amplifying small changes. All these together created conditions from which escape proved nearly impossible. Modern climate science shows how difficult it is to shift Earth from one stable state to another. Ice ages, which lock Earth in cold conditions, persist for tens of thousands of years. Warm periods, like our current interglacial, also demonstrate remarkable stability. The Carnian pluvial episode, pushed into an extreme stable state, remained there not because it wanted to, but because the atmospheric physics, the oceanic chemistry, the geological feedbacks, all aligned to sustain that state. Any perturbation, Any change that might have ended the rain was dampened, absorbed, negated by the system's tendency to return to equilibrium, to its wet equilibrium. Feel yourself floating in darkness, in the space between waking and sleep, as we drift through what finally ended the 2 million-year storm. Gradually, incrementally, the carbon dioxide drawdown from accelerated weathering began to overcome volcanic emissions. Atmospheric CO2 levels, which had spiked at the rain's beginning, slowly declined, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, over hundreds of thousands of years. As CO2 decreased, temperatures dropped, fraction by fraction of a degree. The decline, almost imperceptible year to year, accumulated over millennia. Cooler temperatures meant less evaporation. Less evaporation meant fewer clouds. Fewer clouds meant more solar radiation reaching the surface, but also less infrared radiation trapped at night. The greenhouse effect, weakened by falling CO2, allowed Earth to cool further, creating a negative feedback loop that finally opposed the positive feedback sustaining the rain. Ocean circulation, which had been suppressed by the stratification from constant freshwater input, began to restore itself as precipitation decreased, salinity in surface waters increased, dense salty water, no longer diluted by endless runoff, began to sink, mixing nutrients from deep ocean to surface. The ocean breathed again, mixing, turning over, resuming patterns disrupted for 2 million years. Your heart beats slower, slower, thump, thump, like the turning of geological ages as we drift through the first dry day after eternity. Imagine that day, somewhere on Pangaea, perhaps in a continental interior, perhaps on a mountain slope. The clouds thinned, broke, revealed patches of blue. The rain, which had fallen every day for 2 million years, paused. No creature alive remembered dryness. Generations upon generations, evolutionary lineages entire, had lived and died knowing only wetness. The return of dry air, strange, alien, frightening perhaps to creatures whose biology assumed constant moisture. Amphibians, which had thrived, suddenly found their skin drying uncomfortably. Plants, adapted to permanent saturation, wilted as water became scarce. Landscapes relearning how to dry. The process, gradual, uneven, began in the most elevated regions, on mountain tops and ridges first, then spreading downward into valleys. Surface water evaporated, water tables dropped. Soil that had been saturated for longer than mountains had stood, cracked as it dried, the cracks, spreading, interconnecting, created new pathways for water, for air, for roots. The ground, learning solidity again, remembered hardness, remembered the ability to bear weight without squishing. Life rediscovering fire, lightning strikes, which had crackled through wet storms for millions of years, now fell on dry vegetation, on leaf litter that had accumulated thick in the absence of burning. The first fires, small, tentative, spread through fuel that had never burned, Smoke rose, carried the smell of combustion back into the atmosphere, marked the return of flame as an ecological force. The planet, remembering fire, began to cycle nutrients through ash again, to create open spaces in dense forests, to forge life in the crucible of controlled destruction. Let your thoughts fade completely, drifting into the darkness of deep sleep as we explore soils cracking for the first time in their existence. The clay-rich soils, which had flowed like thick fluid during the rain, stiffened as they dried. Clay particles, which bind tightly when dry but separate when wet, formed coherent masses. This shrinkage created polygonal crack patterns visible from above, networks of fissures that grew deeper with each dry spell, each wetting and drying cycle, breaking soil into smaller aggregates, creating structure, creating the complex architecture that healthy soil requires. The return of dust to the air marked a fundamental shift in atmospheric conditions. Dust particles, tiny fragments of rock and organic matter, had been washed from the air for 2 million years. But as surfaces dried, as winds blew across soil no longer protected by constant moisture, dust lifted, millions of tons, then billions, rising into air that hadn't carried solid particles in geological ages. Dust, though often dismissed as a nuisance, plays crucial roles in Earth systems. Dust particles seed cloud formation, providing nuclei around which water vapor condenses. Dust carries nutrients across oceans, fertilizing marine ecosystems thousands of kilometers from their source. Dust scatters light, creates red sunsets, hazes, atmospheric optics that had been impossible under the eternal rain. The return of dust meant the return of these processes, these connections between land and sky, between continents and oceans. Your body absolutely still, absolutely relaxed, as we drift through the emotional shock of sunlight. Sunlight, unfiltered by clouds, touched Earth's surface for the first time in 2 million years. The brightness, overwhelming to eyes adapted to grey dimness, flooded landscapes in light and colour that few creatures could process. Blues, yellows, the bright white of direct sun on wet surfaces, all colours intensified, sharpened, became almost painful in their vividness. Plants, which had photosynthesized under diffuse grey light, suddenly received full spectrum solar radiation. Some species, adapted to shade, withered under the intensity. Others, carrying genetic memories from before the rain, from ancestors that knew bright sun, responded, oriented leaves to maximize absorption, darkened their pigments to protect against excess radiation. The sky opening after millions of years revealed the universe again. Daytime, the blue sky returned, that color created by Rayleigh's scattering of sunlight through clear atmosphere. Night, stars emerged from behind dissipating clouds, patterns of constellations, unchanged by Earth's ordeal, provided fixed references in a sky that had held only formless grey for uncountable generations. The moon, visible again, waxing and waning, began to influence tides, to provide lunar navigation, to mark time in ways the endless rain had made impossible. Evolution's pause and restart, life, which had adapted so thoroughly to wetness, now faced the return of dryness as a challenge equal to the original rain. Species that had thrived under constant moisture declined, disappeared, became extinct in a world that no longer suited them. Amphibians, which had dominated, retreated to remaining wetlands, to rivers and lakes and swamps, giving up the broad territories they'd colonized during the rain. Reptiles, better adapted to variable moisture conditions, rose to prominence. The ancestors of dinosaurs, small, insignificant creatures during the rain, emerged into a drying world that favored their waterproof skin, their amniotic eggs that could develop away from water, their ability to conserve moisture in arid conditions. The end of the Carnian pluvial episode marked the beginning of reptilian dominance, set the stage for the age of dinosaurs that would follow. Feel yourself sinking into dreams, into the deep darkness of complete rest, as we drift through geological scars left by endless rain. The sedimentary layers deposited during the Carnian pluvial episode, visible in rock sequences worldwide, tell stories geologists can read. Thick mudstones, indicator of still water deposition, alternate with sandstones, marker of flood events. The layers, sometimes hundreds of meters thick, represent the accumulated rain of 2 million years, compressed, lithified, turned to stone. These rocks erode differently than surrounding formations. The mudstones, soft, clay-rich, form badlands where they're exposed, steep gullies, narrow ridges, landscapes carved by modern rain into shapes that echo, in miniature, the larger erosion that formed them. The sandstones, as more resistant, form cliffs and ledges, creating stepped topography in regions where Carnian rocks are exposed, rivers shrinking back into channels. After the rain, the vast sheets of water that covered lowland consolidated, concentrated flow into defined channels. Rivers, which had been braided networks of shallow streams meandering across broad floodplains, cut deeper, narrower channels. The energy of water no longer spread across vast areas, focused into a erosion that carved river valleys faster, deeper than during the rain. Paradoxically, the end of extreme wetness created some of the most dramatic river-cut canyons, as concentrated flows worked through rain-softened sediments, oceans stabilizing again. The salt content, diluted by 2 million years of freshwater input, gradually increased as rainfall normalized. Marine creatures, stressed by varying salinity, found relief as conditions stabilized. The ocean, no longer receiving massive sediment loads from every river, cleared, suspended particles settled, allowing sunlight to penetrate deeper, restoring photosynthesis in upper waters, rebuilding marine ecosystems from the bottom up. Your breathing almost imperceptible now, the gentlest whisper of life as we drift through clouds retreating from dominance. Cloud cover which had been absolute, persistent, all-encompassing, finally broke into partial cover, then scattered clouds, then clear skies between storms, the atmosphere reorganizing, restored circulation patterns that varied seasonally, that moved weather systems across longitudes and latitudes, that created diversity in conditions rather than monotonous uniformity. This return to variability, to seasons, to dry periods alternating with wet, required life to adapt again, to develop flexibility, to carry genetic information for survival in multiple conditions. The evolutionary pressure, intense, drove rapid diversification. Species split into variants adapted to different rainfall patterns, to different seasonal regimes. The end of the rain, paradoxically, accelerated evolution by fragmenting the uniform environment into varied niches. Earth, remembering dryness, was Earth rediscovering complexity. The simple, overwhelming wetness gave way to nuanced conditions. Deserts were formed, grasslands emerged, seasonal forests replaced swamps. Each ecosystem finding its place in a world where water's availability varied by location and season. The planet's surface, which had been uniformly wet, developed character again, diversity, the rich variation that makes Earth interesting rather than monotonous. What the rain taught the planet about feedbacks, about stability, about how far climate can be pushed before it locks into extreme states, echoes through geological time. The Carnian pluvial episode, unique in Earth's history for its duration and its uniform wetness, stands as warning and lesson. Climate can change rapidly on human timescales, gradually on geological timescales, and can remain chained, locked in new configurations, for periods that dwarf civilizations. Feel yourself completely at peace, completely relaxed, drifting through the deep quiet of sleep as we explore a world shaped more by water than stone. The Earth that emerged from the Carnian pluvial episode, different from the Earth that entered it, wore new topography, hosted new species, functioned under new ecological rules. Water, patient sculptor, had carved its preferences into every landscape, every valley, every sediment layer, every surviving species bore water's mark. Rain, as history's quiet sculptor, worked without drama, without catastrophe, just steady. Persistent erosion and deposition that accumulated into transformation. Modern landscapes, some still shaped by Carnian sediments, still following drainage patterns established during those 2 million years. Carry that ancient rain forward, make it present, relevant, tangible to those who know where to look. The patience of geological time, illustrated perfectly by the Carnian pluvial episode, shows how changes too slow to perceive, too gradual to mark, accumulate into world-altering events. 2 million years, unimaginably long to humans, represents less than 1/20th of 1% of Earth's total age. A brief episode, a momentary blip, yet sufficient to remake the planet's surface, to redirect evolution, to leave permanent scars in the geological record. The slow violence of softness, water, gentle, yielding, and capable of holding shape, proves more destructive than hardest stone when given time. The rain that fell during the Carnian, soft, quiet, individually harmless, collectively carved canyons, dissolved mountains, transformed continents, violence, when measured in geological time, doesn't require explosions or impacts, just persistence, just the application of small forces over incomprehensible durations. Your mind empty now, thought dissolving into dreamless sleep, as we drift through why this event still matters today. The Carnian pluvial episode, though ancient, teaches lessons about Earth systems, about climate stability, about how planets respond to forcing. Modern climate change, driven by human greenhouse gas emissions, follows similar physics, similar feedback loops, though on faster timescales and from different causes. Understanding the Carnian helps scientists model climate behavior, test theories about cloud feedbacks, about ocean circulation, about the carbon cycle. The past, preserved in rock, becomes laboratory for studying Earth's climate system. The 2 million years of rain, though never to be repeated in exactly that form, illuminate possibilities, show what Earth is capable of when pushed far from equilibrium. Modern climate echoes of ancient rain appear in extreme precipitation events, in shifts toward wetter conditions in some regions, in the recognition that climate doesn't change smoothly, but can flip between states. The Carnian, while extreme, reminds us that Earth's climate has natural variability, far exceeding anything in human experience. Our current climate crisis, real and urgent, unfolds against a backdrop of planetary change that makes our concerns simultaneously tiny and monumentally important. What endless rain reveals about fragility, the systems we depend on, seasonal rains, dry periods for agriculture, stable sea levels, predictable weather. All these exist in delicate balance. Push too hard in any direction, and Earth might reorganize into configurations hostile to human civilization. The Carnian pluvial episode, lethal to any civilization that might have existed, stands as testament to Earth's ability to sustain conditions incompatible with human survival. Yet, Earth's ability to endure extremes also reassures. The planet survived 2 million years of rain, emerged transformed but functional, capable of supporting the diversification that would eventually produce mammals, primates, humans. Earth is resilient, though not unchanging. Life persists, though not unchanged. The rain ended, stability returned, and time moved forward, carrying the scars but not trapped by them. Let yourself drift deeper, deeper still, into the absolute quiet of sleep as we explore rain as both creator and eraser. Rain created the sedimentary layers geologists study, created the selective pressures that drove Triassic evolution, created landscapes and ecosystems that wouldn't have existed otherwise. But rain also erased, removed evidence of earlier geological events, drove species extinct, destroyed information about Earth's past. The same force, simultaneously constructive and destructive, building and tearing down, shaping through both creation and destruction, the planet's long nocturnal emission, if Earth could dream, might remember those 2 million years with strange emotion, a time of transformation, of challenge, of testing planetary systems to their limits, a time unlike any before or since, when the sky stayed grey, when water ruled everything, when the future hung in balance as feedbacks battled for dominance, a dream of rain, falling, falling, falling onto a world that learned patience, learned adaptation, learned survival in conditions that seemed impossible to survive. When water ruled everything, life discovered that everything means everything. No escape to dryness, no refuge on high ground for long, no way to avoid water's influence. Every creature, every plant, every ecological relationship, mediated through moisture, shaped by saturation, defined by the endless presence of water. The 2 million years, long enough that nothing from before the rain survived unchanged into after, long enough that the rain became normal, became reality, became the only world life knew. How silence returned between storms, gradually, eventually, as the rain lessened, as weather patterns broke free from their locked configuration, gaps appeared, minutes at first, then hours, then days between storms, the silence of rainless air, shocking to creatures evolved in constant patter, marked the beginning of the end, the beginning of after, the slow collapse of the system that had sustained impossible conditions for impossible durations. You're breathing the only sound now, soft, steady, peaceful, as we drift through the legacy written in sediment layers. Every layer, every thin band of mudstone or sandstone represents days, weeks, years of ancient rain. The accumulated thickness, the hundreds of meters of Carnian sediments, testifies to the staggering volume of water that fell, the billions of tons of rock that weathered, transported, deposited, layer by patient layer, building the archives where Earth stores its memory. What would happen if it began again? If modern Earth's climate locked into similar patterns, civilization would collapse within years. Our agriculture, dependent on seasonal patterns and dry harvest periods, would fail. Our cities, designed for occasional rain, would flood. Our technology, requiring dry conditions for most manufacturing, would cease. Within a generation, humanity would retreat to any remaining high ground, our numbers decimated, our structures abandoned to rising waters. Within a millennium, most evidence of human civilization dissolved, washed away, buried under sediments of a new endless rain. But such speculation, though sobering, remains unlikely. Modern Earth, with its current geography, its current orbital parameters, its current ecosystem, would respond differently to similar forcing. The Carnian pluvial episode required specific conditions. The Rangelia eruptions, the supercontinent configuration, the particular state of Earth systems in the Triassic, conditions that won't recur, though other extremes, other climate catastrophes remain possible, remain likely given human forcing of greenhouse gases. Lessons from a soaked Earth teach humility, teach perspective, teach recognition of Earth's power and humanity's vulnerability. We live on a planet capable of extremes we barely imagine. We prosper during a period of unusual climate stability. We depend on conditions that are neither permanent nor guaranteed. The Carnian, reaching across 200 million years, whispers warnings to those willing to listen. The humility of planetary forces comes from recognizing that Earth doesn't care about human preferences, doesn't maintain climate for our benefit, simply functions according to physical laws. The same laws that drove 2 million years of rain operate today, can be triggered today by sufficient forcing, whether that forcing comes from volcanism, from human emissions, from asteroid impact or orbital shifts, matters less than recognizing that Earth will respond, will change, will endure long after any particular species disappears. Time measured in falling drops is time measured in the smallest of events, each drop individually meaningless, collectively irresistible. This is how Earth operates, through accumulation, through the patient work of simple forces applied over staggering durations. A single raindrop erodes nothing. 1 trillion raindrops falling for 2 million years reshape continents. The lesson, both geological and philosophical, teaches that patience and persistence overcome all obstacles, given sufficient time. And as you sink into the deepest sleep, into the darkness where dreams dissolve, where consciousness fades completely, we drift through the final understanding, the rain that rewrote Earth, rewrote it with water, with the simplest molecule, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, arranged in shape that allows it to dissolve, to erode, to transport, to transform. Everything that made the Carnian pluvial episode possible flowed from the properties of water, responding to energy from Earth's interior, to energy from the sun, cycling, falling, rising, falling again. And the rain fell on, through one last sunset that never fully came, through one last night that never fully darkened, through one last dawn that brought only grey light and the endless sound of drops on stone, on soil, on water. The world shaped by falling water, reshaped, transformed, made new again by the oldest of Earth's sculptors, by rain, patient, persistent, eternal in its moment, falling through geological time, falling through evolutionary change, falling through the long, slow, patient transformation of everything it touched, falling, falling still through memory, through rock, through the sediments that remember, through the fossils that testify, through the story we tell, drifting, floating, sinking into the deep quiet, the absolute stillness of sleep, where we continue drifting, floating through ancient rain, through water falling from skies that never cleared, through the long transformation of Earth, your body completely relaxed now, every muscle soft, every tension released, as we drift through the memories Earth carries, the geological record written in stone, remembers those 2 million years with peculiar clarity. Thick sequences of mudstone and siltstone, appearing on every continent, tell the same story simultaneously, a global event affecting everywhere, leaving signatures that persist after 200 million years of subsequent geological history. In the mountains of Italy, in the deserts of Arizona, in the highlands of China, geologists find these layers, grey, fine-grained, full of fossils from creatures adapted to wetness. The rocks themselves, their mineral composition, their texture, their chemical signatures, all testify to formation underwater, to deposition in environments that stayed wet, that never dried long enough for oxidation, for evaporation, for any of the processes that characterize dry climate sedimentation. The disappearance of deserts during the Carnian marked one of the most dramatic landscape transformations. Deserts, which had existed in Pangaea's interior, in rain shadows, in high-pressure zones where air descended dry, all transformed into wetlands. The Aeolian sandstones, rocks formed from wind-blown dunes that characterize earlier Triassic deposits, abruptly stopped forming, replaced by fluvial and lacustrine sediments. Rocks formed in rivers and lakes. This transition, visible in stratigraphic columns worldwide, shows how comprehensively the rain reorganized surface processes. Wind erosion, the dominant force in arid regions, ceased to operate. Water erosion, normally restricted to occasional floods in deserts, became continuous. The dune fields, stabilized by vegetation that colonized newly moistened sand, gradually disappeared, buried under sediments transported from distant highlands by swollen rivers. Let your mind drift like sand grains suspended in floodwater as we explore rain-driven plate stress and erosion, the weight of water accumulated in thick sediment deposits, in risen ocean levels, in saturated crustal rocks, created stresses that influenced plate tectonics, sedimentary basins, filled to overflowing, compressed the crust beneath them. The added weight, distributed across continental platforms, altered stress patterns, potentially influencing fault activity, volcanic eruptions, the slow convection of mantle beneath the plates, erosion, removing mass from highlands. Added to these stress changes, mountains, losing billions of tons of rock to weathering and transport that became lighter. The crustal blocks beneath them, freed from some of their load, rose isostatically. This isostatic rebound, occurring over hundreds of thousands of years, partially compensated for erosion, keeping mountains from wearing away completely even under the assault of endless rain. Ancient floodplains turned global. Every lowland, every basin, every gentle slope, experienced flooding that persisted not for days or weeks but for centuries, for millennia. The distinction between river channel and floodplain disappeared. All became floodplain, all remained underwater. The only high ground, the only refuge, existed on the steepest inclines, on mountain peaks, on the most elevated plateaus, and even these, constantly battered by rain, constantly eroding, offered only temporary sanctuary. Your heart beats so slow now, thump, thump, like the pulse of geological time itself, as we drift through the smell of earth under constant rain. Modern noses, adapted to dry air, to varied sense, to the olfactory complexity of our world, would struggle to interpret the Carnian atmosphere, the smell dominated by moisture, by the green scent of constant plant growth, by organic compounds released from decomposing vegetation in oxygen-poor swamps, would be both familiar and alien. Geosmin, that compound responsible for petrichor, the rain smell, comes from bacteria that flourish in soil moisture cycles. But under endless rain, these bacteria, their life cycles, their production of volatiles, would shift toward the chemistry of permanent wetlands, toward the compounds released by anaerobic decomposition, toward smells more like swamp than like fresh rain on dry earth. The air, thick with humidity, would carry scents far differently than dry air. Molecules lingering, spreading slowly, creating an olfactory landscape as transformed as the physical one. The darkening of skies over epochs came not just from clouds, but from the transformation of the atmosphere itself. Water vapor, abundant beyond anything in modern Earth's experience, absorbed and scattered light differently. The air itself, heavy with moisture, created haze even when clouds thinned momentarily. Visibility, limited, horizons, close and indistinct. The world shrank, became intimate, immediate. Everything beyond a few kilometers vanished into grey, into moisture-heavy air that obscured distance and detail. This isolation, this inability to see far, would affect any species capable of long-range vision. Birds, which use landmarks for navigation, would find their world reduced, compressed. Navigation over long distances, impossible without visual references, without the ability to see mountains or coastlines from afar. Migration, if it occurred, would rely on other senses, on smell perhaps, on magnetic orientation, on anything except sight. Feel yourself sinking deeper, heavier, into the mattress, into sleep, as we explore how plants evolved non-stop transpiration. Transpiration, the process by which plants release water vapor through their leaves, normally helps draw water and nutrients up from roots. But in an atmosphere already saturated with moisture, transpiration becomes difficult. The gradient between leaf interior and exterior air, normally strong, weakens when air holds maximum moisture. Plants during the Carnian evolved mechanisms to force transpiration even in saturated air. Some developed specialized leaf structures, stomata that could create local low humidity zones. Others evolved active transport mechanisms, using energy to move water even without strong concentration gradients. These adaptations, costly in terms of energy, became necessary for survival. Plants that couldn't transpire efficiently, couldn't move nutrients, couldn't grow, couldn't compete, disappeared, replaced by species better adapted to permanently wet conditions. The chemistry of endless rain involved more than just water falling from sky. Rainwater, slightly acidic from dissolved carbon dioxide, became more acidic as it passed through atmosphere rich in volcanic gases. Sulfur dioxide, from ongoing eruptions, dissolved to form sulfuric acid. Nitrogen compounds, from lightning in the eternal storms, added nitric acid. The rain that fell, corrosive beyond pure water, attacked rock and soil with enhanced chemical weathering power. This acidic rain, though not as extreme as industrial acid rain in modern times, still accelerated dissolution of minerals. Carbonate rocks, limestones and dolostone weathered rapidly, their calcium and magnesium, released into solution, travelled to the ocean where they eventually precipitated as marine carbonates. This transfer of material from land to sea, from rock to dissolved ion to precipitated mineral, occurred at rates far exceeding normal geological cycles. Your breathing barely perceptible, the gentlest whisper, as we drift through how clouds became permanent residents. Clouds, usually transient features, forming, dissipating, reforming elsewhere, achieved permanence during the Carnian. Individual water droplets certainly fell as rain within hours of formation, but the clouds themselves, the atmospheric structures, the regions of condensation and precipitation persisted in fixed locations, over fixed latitudes, creating a sky that, while dynamic in its internal churnings, remained static in its overall structure. This permanence, this fixation of clouds in space, resulted from locked atmospheric circulation. The Hadley cells, Ferrel cells, polar cells, all the atmospheric circulation patterns that normally shift and vary, stabilized in configurations determined by Pangea shape, by ocean temperature patterns, by the planetary heat budget under greenhouse conditions, and once stabilized, once locked into place, they resisted change, resisted the perturbations that normally create weather variability. These skies that never cleared became the defining characteristic of the epoch. More than the rain itself, more than the flooding, more than any other feature, the endless grey oppressed created a world of monotony, of sameness, of conditions that repeated without variation. Psychological effects, had humans existed, would have been profound. Seasonal affective disorder that last in lifetimes. Cultural development, which often celebrates sky, sun, stars, would be impossible. Religious impulses, which often direct themselves skyward, would find only cloud, only grey, only barrier between earth and whatever might lie beyond. Let your thoughts dissolve completely, like limestone in acidic rain. As we drift through the changing salinity of ancient oceans, ocean salinity, normally stable at about 35 parts per thousand, decreased significantly during the Permian. Estimates suggest surface waters, especially in coastal regions, drop to 25 or even 20 parts per thousand, brackish by modern standards, approaching the salinity of Baltic Sea rather than open ocean. This change, though it sounds small, represented catastrophe for many marine species, organisms whose physiology evolved in stable salinity couldn't adapt fast enough. Coral reefs, which require specific salinity ranges, died back, retreated to regions where mixing with deep water maintained higher salt concentrations. Fish, whose kidneys and gills regulate internal salt balance, faced stress as the ocean chemistry shifted. Some species, adapted to brackish water, thrived. Others disappeared from the fossil record, victims of planetary transformation they couldn't survive. Marine life responding to diluted seas evolved new strategies, new physiologies. Some species developed enhanced osmoregulation, kidneys and gills that could handle wider salinity ranges. Others migrated, following zones of preferred salinity as these shifted with oceanographic changes. Still others, particularly in coastal regions, became euryhaline, capable of tolerating both marine and near freshwater conditions. These adaptations, preserved in descendants, explain why some modern marine groups show unexpected tolerance for salinity variation. The hum of rainfall as planetary white noise created acoustic environment unique in Earth's history. Imagine constant patter, constant impact of water on surfaces, varying in intensity but never ceasing. This sound, masking other sounds, absorbing other frequencies, would dominate the auditory landscape. Animal communication, calls and songs used for mating, for territorial defense, for social bonding, would need to adapt, to use frequencies that penetrated the rain noise, to increase volume, to develop new strategies for being heard in a world where water's voice never stopped. Some animals might have abandoned acoustic communication entirely, evolving enhanced visual signals, bioluminescence perhaps, or olfactory communication, scent markers that persisted despite constant moisture. Others, particularly aquatic species, might have benefited. Waterborne sound, travelling far through dense medium, would carry farther than airborne calls. The selection pressures, complex and varied, drove divergent evolution, creating diversity from constraint. Your body absolutely still, absolutely peaceful, as we drift through why lightning still mattered. Lightning, which normally ignites fires, lost that ecological role under endless rain. But lightning remained important for other reasons. Electrical discharges, converting atmospheric nitrogen into reactive nitrogen compounds, provided nutrients that plants could use. This nitrogen fixation, normally supplemented by biological fixation from bacteria, increased during the Carnian, helping sustain the rapid plant growth that covered continents. Lightning also influenced atmospheric chemistry, producing ozone, breaking apart molecules, creating reactive species that influenced weather patterns. The constant storms, the continuous electrical activity, maintained atmospheric chemistry in states that would otherwise be impossible. The crackling energy, visible as constant flicker within clouds, as occasional strikes to ground or water, provided one of the few visual variations in a world otherwise dominated by grey uniformity. The role of monsoons turned permanent represents one of the key mechanisms sustaining the rain. Monsoons, in modern Earth, result from seasonal temperature contrasts between land and ocean. During summer, land heats faster than ocean, creating low pressure that draws moist oceanic air inland. This air rises, cools, releases moisture as torrential rain. In winter, the pattern reverses. Land cools, air descends, and dry conditions prevail. But during the Carnian, the contrast never reversed. The elevated atmospheric CO2, the greenhouse warming, the heat retention by clouds, all kept continental interiors warm even when solar input decreased. The monsoon circulation, once established, never broke, never cycled back to dry phase. Instead, it ran continuously, drawing moisture from Panthalassic Ocean, carrying it over Pangaea, releasing it as rain that fell and fell and fell. Let yourself sink into the deepest rest, the profound quiet of dreamless sleep, as we drift through when storms stopped being events. Events, by definition, have beginnings and endings, have before and after states. But storms during the Carnian lost their eventness, became instead the steady state, the normal condition, the baseline against which nothing else varied. The language of storms, of fronts and systems and pressure changes became meaningless, replaced by the simple reality of rain. Always rain, only rain. This linguistic shift, had language existed, would reflect deeper conceptual changes. In a world where all days are rainy, the word rainy loses meaning or becomes redundant. Rain becomes the unnamed default, the assumption, the condition so universal it requires no mention. Only the absence of rain, when it finally came, would merit comment, would require new vocabulary, would challenge understanding in ways that make-believe clear skies never could. How humans would fail to survive it extends beyond simple physical requirements. Yes, we need dry shelter, dry food storage, dry everything. But we also need, psychologically, variation, seasons, change. The monotony, the endless sameness, would break human minds before it broke human bodies. Mental health, which struggles under prolonged cloudiness even in modern times, would collapse under literally millions of years of grey. Despair, depression, loss of hope, all these would become not individual conditions but species-level traits, and humans, social creatures, culture-building creatures, would find culture impossible. Art which draws on nature's beauty and variation, would have only grey to contemplate. Music, which often mimics or responds to natural rhythms, would find only the drum of rain. Science, which requires observation of patterns and changes, would find only stasis. Human civilization, requiring surplus, requiring time for thought beyond survival, would never emerge in a world demanding constant struggle against constant water. The psychological weight of endless rain presses down, heavier, heavier. But you're safe here, warm and dry, drifting into sleep, into the peaceful darkness where rain is only memory, only story, only the distant echo of ancient earth calling across time. Fossil records written in water preserve strange assemblages, creatures that lived in water, alongside creatures that normally would have avoided it, all crowded together on shrinking high ground. On temporary islands in the continental flood, the bone beds, thick accumulations of fossils, show mass mortality events, populations trapped, drowned, preserved together in sediments that would lithify into stone, into monuments to the planet's watery rage. But fossils also show adaptation, show evolution proceeding rapidly under strong selection pressure. New species appear in Carnian rocks, species with adaptations for wetness, for swimming, for living in trees above the floods. The explosion of diversity, particularly in reptiles, that would lead to dinosaurs, to pterosaurs, to the Archosaur radiation that would dominate the Mesozoic, began during or immediately after the rain. Evolution, given constraint, given pressure, given need, responds with innovation. The smoothing of Earth's sharp edges continued throughout the episode. Angularity, the sharp peaks and ridges that mark young landscapes, rounded, softened, wore away under constant chemical and physical attack. The planet's face aged rapidly. Landscapes that normally would take tens of millions of years to mature, to round, to gentle, did so in a tenth that time. The rain, working with patient urgency, with relentless softness, achieved in 2 million years what dry erosion might have taken 20 million to accomplish. Your consciousness fading now, fading into the darkness, into sleep deep and dreamless, as we drift through the slow burial of civilizations that never arose. Intelligence, which would eventually evolve, which would eventually build cities and contemplate stars, might have emerged earlier, might have appeared in the Triassic, but the rain, flooding the world, flooding the possibility space, prevented the stable conditions, the resource surplus, the environmental predictability that complex civilization requires. So the potential civilizations, the might-have-beens, the alternative timelines where consciousness arose 200 million years earlier, all drowned, buried under sediments of endless rain. The universe, unfolding, waited, patient, as Earth worked through its hydrological crisis, as the planet cleared the rain, as evolution groped toward forms that would, someday, eventually, produce minds capable of understanding what had happened, of reading the rocks, of reconstructing the story. Rain-fed landslides shaping continents occurred at frequencies difficult to comprehend. Every slope saturated, every soil horizon waterlogged, every rock face chemically weakened, existed perpetually on the edge of failure, triggering events, earthquakes, particularly intense storms, undermining by stream erosion, initiated failures that sent millions of cubic meters of material sliding, flowing, spreading across lowlands. These mass movements, repeated constantly across Pangaea, resurfaced the continents, old landscapes buried under debris, new landscapes formed from the deposits, the topography constantly renewing, constantly reshaping, existed in state of flux. That modern Earth, with its stable hills and established vegetation, never experiences. The ground itself, unreliable, temporary, made permanence impossible, made any attempt at stability futile. The end of dry wind erosion removed one of the three major erosional forces: glaciers, water, and wind. Normally share the work of landscape sculpture, but during the Carnian, glaciers didn't exist in the warm climate. Wind, ineffective in moisture-saturated air, contributed nothing. Only water remained, only water worked, carving, transporting, depositing, performing all the geological labor, doing in isolation what normally requires three agents working together. This monopoly, water's complete dominance, created distinctive landscapes lacking wind-eroded features, lacking ventifacts and yardangs, lacking deflation hollows and dune fields. Everything carved by water, shaped by water, testimony to water's power when granted unopposed rain. The modern landscape, shaped by multiple forces, shows complexity, variation, but Carnian landscapes, simplified by single-agent erosion, would have appeared more uniform, more monotonous, more repetitive in their forms. Let your body melt into complete relaxation, every muscle softening, releasing, as we drift through atmospheric circulation trapped in loops. The Hadley cell, that tropical circulation pattern where air rises at equator, flows poleward at altitude, descends in subtropics, locked into position. The feral cell, the mid-latitude circulation, similarly stabilized, and the polar cells, weak during the warm Carnian, barely functioned, creating atmospheric dynamics profoundly different from modern Earth. This circulation pattern, once established, self-reinforced, rising air at the equator, loaded with moisture from warm ocean, released that moisture as rain. The latent heat released by condensation powered further uplift, driving more circulation, pulling more moisture from ocean, creating more rain. The loop closed on itself, sustained itself, required no external forcing once initiated. Like an engine running on its own heat, the circulation continued, driving the rain, driving the transformation of Earth. the planet's temperature under cloud cover stayed remarkably uniform. The clouds, reflecting sunlight, prevented extreme heating, but they also trapped infrared, preventing cooling. The result, a thermal blanket effect, created narrow temperature range, perhaps 20 degrees Celsius year-round in tropics, perhaps 5 degrees in the warmest parts of polar regions which, though warmer than modern poles, still remained cooler than equatorial zones. The temperature gradient, reduced but present, drove atmospheric circulation, drove the monsoons, drove the rain. Greenhouse effect amplified by humidity created conditions unprecedented in recent geological history. Water vapor, the most abundant greenhouse gas, existed at concentrations far exceeding modern levels. This moisture, combined with elevated CO2 from volcanic emissions, trapped heat with efficiency that raised global average temperatures perhaps 8 to 10 degrees above modern values. Earth, in the Carnian, was a greenhouse, humid, warm, wet. A climate state that would be catastrophic for modern life, but one which Triassic life, given millions of years, adapted to, survived in, even thrived within, your heartbeat fading into the distance. Thump, thump, softer, softer, as we drift through the sky as a ceiling, not a window, the cloud deck, impenetrable, absolute, separated Earth from cosmos more effectively than any solid barrier. Cosmic rays, normally showering Earth constantly, were partially blocked. Solar wind, deflected by magnetosphere, additionally scattered by thick atmosphere, even gravitational influences, the subtle tide-raising effects of moon and sun persisted, but their visual correlates. The moon in the sky, the sun's apparent motion, became invisible, theoretical, irrelevant to surface life. This disconnection, this isolation from the universe beyond, made Earth, paradoxically, more planetary and less cosmic, a world turned inward, focused on its own surface processes, its own atmospheric dynamics, its own hydrological cycles, the stars, which would eventually guide human navigation, which would inspire philosophy and religion, which would provide the context for understanding Earth's place in cosmos, remained hidden, unknown, unsuspected by any creature living through the rain. Rain-driven extinction pressures operated continuously, relentlessly, targeting specific adaptations, specific ecological strategies. Creatures adapted to dry conditions, herbivores that browsed dryland plants, predators that hunted in arid environments, all faced decline, displacement, extinction. The fossil record, though incomplete, shows turnover, old species disappearing, new species appearing, the composition of ecosystems shifting, reorganizing around the central reality of endless moisture. But extinction, though occurring, wasn't total, wasn't catastrophic in the sudden sense. The Carnian pluvial episode, unlike asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions, killed gradually, selectively. Those species flexible enough, Those with genetic variation allowing adaptation to wetter conditions survived their descendants, inheriting successful adaptations, would eventually dominate the post-Carnian world, would radiate into new forms, would colonize ecological niches opened by others' extinctions. Species that thrived in saturation expanded dramatically. Amphibians, whose permeable skin requires moisture, spread worldwide. Certain reptile lineages, pre-adapted for wet conditions, diversified. Plants suited to wetlands, ferns and horsetails and early conifers capable of waterlogged growth, covered continents. These successful species, though they would later decline when dryness returned, wrote their genetic successes into the evolutionary record, past adaptations forward that would resurface whenever Earth again became wet. Feel yourself drifting, floating in the darkness, in the space between thought and sleep, as we explore constant runoff reshaping deltas, river deltas, those transitional zones where land meets sea, experienced explosive growth during the Carnian. The sediment load increased perhaps 100-fold above normal, built deltas outward at rates measured in kilometers per millennium rather than kilometers per million years. These deltas, massive, complex, created new land constantly, land that would, in some regions, persist after the rain ended, becoming fertile plains, becoming foundations for future ecosystems. The Mississippi Delta, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, other major modern deltas, all build at rates impressive by human standards, but Carnian deltas, fed by continental-scale erosion, by floods that never subsided, grew at rates that would have been visible, observable, capable of burying coastal ecosystems in decades rather than millennia. The loss of clear horizons affected more than just visibility. Horizons, that line where Earth meets sky, provides psychological comfort, provides sense of space, of possibility, of somewhere else to go. But horizons, during the Carnian, disappeared into moisture-heavy air, into grey, into nothingness a few kilometers distant. The world shrank, became claustrophobic, became a series of local zones with no distant vistas, no far places, no sense of the planet's size. This perceptual shrinkage would affect any species capable of appreciating distance. Migration, requiring knowledge of far destinations, would become difficult. Territorial behavior, normally including defense of large ranges, might compress. Navigation by landmarks, impossible beyond immediate locality. The cognitive map, that mental representation of space, would necessarily be local, immediate, focused on the knowable world within sensory range, rather than incorporating distant places glimpsed from high ground. Rain, as the dominant sound of Earth, created acoustic environment that modern humans, living in a world of mechanical noise, of voices, of music, can barely imagine. The patter, constant, variable only in intensity, would form the auditory baseline, the sound against which all other sounds would be perceived. Speech, had language existed, would need to occur during quieter rain, or would need to be loud, project over the constant background, or perhaps communication would shift toward frequencies that transmitted well through rain, toward lower pitches, toward sounds that wouldn't be absorbed by water droplets. You're breathing the softest whisper now, barely present, as we drift through how nights felt under endless clouds. Night, during the Carnian, brought complete darkness, cloud cover, thick enough to block daytime sun, completely blocked starlight, moonlight, any celestial illumination. The darkness, absolute except for lightning flashes, would have shaped behavior. Limited activity, created world where diurnal patterns, though present, operated under dimmer day and darker night than anything in modern experience. Nocturnal animals adapted to darkness might have found advantage. Their enhanced night vision, their non-visual senses, would function as well under clouds as under clear skies. But diurnal animals, depending on sunlight, on colour vision, on visual acuity, would struggle. The selective pressure, favouring enhanced low-light vision, favouring other senses, would drive adaptations we see echoed in modern animals, particularly in lineages that passed through the Carnian. The absence of stars for millions of years meant the loss of navigation, of celestial orientation. Some animals, even today, use stars for orientation during migration, use patterns of polarized skylight visible even during day. All these navigational aids disappeared under the clouds. Animals, if they migrated, would need to rely on magnetic fields, on smell, on memory of landmarks, on anything except the sky. The adaptations developed, the neural circuitry for non-celestial navigation would persist, would be inherited by descendants long after the clouds cleared. Earth, without stargazing, it seems impossible to imagine. Human culture, so bound to stars, to constellations, to the wonder of night sky, developed only because clear skies existed, because stars were visible, because the universe showed itself. Had the Carnian persisted, had the clouds never cleared, intelligence, if it evolved, would develop without cosmology, without awareness of universe beyond atmosphere. The philosophies, the religions, the sciences, all would be fundamentally different, focused on Earth, on weather, on the only reality accessible to observation. Your mind empty now, thoughts dissolved into stillness, as we drift through the slow memory loss of landscapes. Every landscape carries history in its form. River valleys remember ice ages that carved them. Mountain ranges remember tectonic collisions. Even plains remember ancient seas that deposited their sediments. But the Carnian, in erasing topography, erased these memories. The blank slate, as created by uniform erosion and deposition, would confuse any geologist attempting to reconstruct pre-Carnian geography. This amnesia, this geological forgetting, creates challenges for modern scientists, trying to reconstruct plate positions, trying to understand climate patterns, trying to map ancient continents, the Carnian layers, thick and widespread, bury, obscure, make invisible the rocks and structures that came before, like a reset button. The rain erased much of Earth's previous geological diary, forcing us to rely on scattered evidence, on rare outcrops, on indirect methods to understand what the planet was before the clouds locked into place. Geological time measured in rainfall, each drop a clock tick, each storm a minute, each century of rain a barely perceptible movement of the hour hand. This is how Earth tracks its history, not in human seconds and minutes, but in the accumulation of tiny events, of processes operating below perception, of changes too slow to observe but too persistent to avoid. The Carnian 2 million years of one type of weather represents a single sentence in Earth's autobiography, a sentence that reads, "And then it rained." The planet's surface slowly dissolving occurred through chemical weathering that proceeded without the interruptions dry periods normally provide. Chemical reactions, breaking down minerals, releasing ions, forming clays, all accelerated in permanent moisture. The rate of chemical weathering, perhaps 5 to 10 times normal, stripped continents of soluble materials, enriched oceans with dissolved ions, altered the chemical budgets of multiple global cycles simultaneously. This accelerated weathering, while destructive to landscapes, created opportunities. The released nutrients, washed to ocean, supported massive algal blooms, increased photosynthesis, even under reduced sunlight, drew down atmospheric CO2, worked toward eventual climate stabilization. The erosion, though violent and transformative, ultimately helped end the very conditions that caused it. The planet, self-regulating, used the rain to cure itself of the rain. Chemical weathering without rest transformed rock into soil, soil into clay, clay into suspension, suspension into sediment. The cycle, continuous, accelerated, created clay deposits of unprecedented extent. These clays, preserved in rocks worldwide, provide evidence of the Carnian, allow correlation between distant continents, tell stories of planetary transformation through their mineral composition, their chemical signatures, their subtle variations that encode information about the rain that formed them. Clay-rich worlds emerging everywhere, changed surface properties. Clay soils, impermeable, prevented water infiltration, created more runoff, more flooding, more erosion, a positive feedback, where weathering created conditions that enhanced weathering, where rain created surfaces that produced more rain effects, the landscape transforming itself, accelerating its own destruction, rushing towards some final stable state that would end the cycle. Let yourself sink completely into absolute rest, absolute peace, as we drift through the muting of Earth's colours, colours which require light to perceive, which depend on mineral chemistry, which reflect environmental conditions, shifted during the Carnian, the bright reds and oranges of oxidized iron, disappeared as reducing conditions prevailed. Greys and greens, the colours of unoxidized minerals, of organic rich sediments, of materials formed in oxygen-poor water, dominated. Even plants, though green from chlorophyll, appeared darker in the dim light. The world, desaturated, muted, like an old photograph where bright hues have faded to grey. This colour shift, though subtle, would affect any species with colour vision. Flowers, which use colours to attract pollinators, would be less visible, less distinctive. Colour-based communication, whether for mating, warning, or camouflage, would work less effectively, driving evolution toward other signals, other strategies, other ways of standing out in a grey world. The smell of minerals forever exposed changed as weathering proceeded. Fresh rock, newly exposed by erosion, releases distinctive mineral scents. But during the Carnian, rock stayed wet, stayed covered with moisture film that altered chemical signatures. The smell, more of solution chemistry, of dissolved minerals, of clay formation than of fresh stone, would create olfactory landscapes subtle, complex, rich in information for any creature capable of interpreting it. Rainfall as planetary respiration, the breathing of Earth continued. In, out, water evaporating from ocean, the inhale, water condensing in clouds, the pause, water falling as rain, the exhale, the cycle, repeating billions of times per day across the planet, constituted respiration at geological scale. The planet, breathing water, breathing life, breathing transformation. When clouds became climate governors, they assumed role normally distributed across multiple systems. Oceans, which usually dominate climate through heat storage, became secondary. Plate tectonics, which influences climate through mountain building and volcanic emissions, continued. But the clouds, the immediate or proximal cause of surface conditions, controlled daily reality. The climate, dictated by clouds, responded to cloud dynamics, lived or died by cloud behavior. The feedback loops that wouldn't break persisted because no external forcing interrupted them. No asteroid impact, no sudden geographic change, no orbital variation strong enough to overcome atmospheric inertia. Earth, isolated in space, stable in its orbit, continued along the path it had locked into. The rain, self-sustaining, self-perpetuating, continued not because it wanted to, but because the physics, the chemistry, the planetary dynamics all aligned to maintain it. Why the rain never stopped comes down to positive feedbacks overpowering negative feedbacks. Every system, whether climate or ecosystem or economy, contains both positive and negative feedbacks. Negative feedbacks, dampening change, promoting stability, usually dominate, maintain homeostasis. But during the Carnian, the positive feedbacks, amplifying change, grew stronger. Warmth created moisture. Moisture created more warmth. More clouds created more rain. More rain created conditions that sustained clouds. The system, spiraling, locked into extreme state it couldn't escape. What finally ended the 2 million-year storm, we drift toward understanding as your breathing slows to almost nothing as sleep approaches complete. The volcanic emissions, which started the crisis, gradually declined. Carbon dioxide, which had spiked to perhaps 5 or 6 times modern levels, slowly decreased as weathering consumed it. The decrease, imperceptible year to year, accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, eventually the carbon drawdown, the cooling it caused, weakened the feedbacks just enough. The locked circulation, perturbed by cooling, began to vary, to shift. Once variation began, once the system escaped its locked state, change accelerated. The atmosphere, finding new circulation patterns, broke free from the configurations that sustained rain. Monsoons, which had blown constantly, developed off-seasons, dry periods, intervals when high pressure dominated and rain paused. These pauses, initially brief, lengthened, spread, eventually dominated. The rain, after 2 million years of persistence, finally, gradually, incrementally, stopped. The first dry day after eternity arrived without fanfare, without drama. Just another day when, somewhere, the rain paused and didn't resume immediately. Then another dry day, then a week, then a dry season. The transition, not sudden, not catastrophic, unfolded over tens of thousands of years. Climate shifting from constantly wet to mostly wet to seasonally wet to the varied patterns that would characterize the later Triassic. Your consciousness fading completely now, dissolving like mist, like cloud, like rain evaporating in the first sunlight after eternity. As we drift through, the universe keeps turning, keeps revolving, keeps bringing Earth around the sun in cycles that never paused, never acknowledged the rain, never cared about the transformation happening on one small planet's surface. The stars, invisible for 2 million years, had continued burning. Galaxies, unseen, continued their cosmic dance. The universe, vast and uncaring, proceeded with its own evolution, its own transformation, while Earth, tiny, insignificant, worked through its crisis, struggled with its feedbacks, slowly, patiently, found its way back to climate states that allowed clearer skies, drier land, more varied conditions. And the rain, after reshaping continents, after redirecting evolution, after leaving scars that would persist for hundreds of millions of years, simply, quietly, gently, stopped. The clouds thinned, broke apart, revealed blue. The sun, unfiltered, touched ground, and Earth, transformed, emerged into a new age, carrying forward the memories, the adaptations, the geological signatures of the 2 million years when water ruled everything.